This land is peaceful, its inhabitants kind.
Welcome back, nerds. Fino here with a guide for the Trung sisters. They're a limited servant introduced in the Water Monsters Crisis event, and they're yet another attempt to dangle that age-old carrot, a looping art saber. Is Nasu gonna pull away the football at the last second again? Let's find out. The Trung sisters, in contrast to the very selfish Dioscuri, have a lot more of their power budget dedicated to party buffs. You have Rebel Charisma, which is a 3-turn party attack and arts buff. It has a 5-turn cooldown for high uptime. Then there's Holy King Trung, a 30% personal battery that comes with party NP gain and crit resistance. You should level this skill up first, by the way, as with most batteries. Attack, arts, and NP gain is a very enticing combo for setups with multiple attackers, so there's some offensive potential there. The crit resistance points to a defensive bent that's reinforced in their Noble Phantasm. Let Us Walk Our Land Together is a single target arts attack with a very generous hit count of 9. Its overcharge buffs party arts and buster performance for 3 turns. This in effect gives the Trung sisters ramping damage as long as you keep chaining this. The fact that it splashes onto your entire party encourages multi-core setups, since against the 1-3-3 node or something, you can have the sisters MP to take out the first wave, your AoE attacker loops against wave 2, riding off those party buffs, and then you get to turn 3. By chaining the Trung sisters into your AoE, you can get even more damage from that second activation. It's a cool idea in concept, though there's a problem. The Trung sisters lack any sort of specialized damage, like anti-alignment or anti-trait. For high-end multi-core shit, you want your main attacker to have some sort of edge against the final boss of a 90++ node, because these often have health values approaching 1 million. This is why, in practice, I expect to see Benny, Enma, and Medusa dominate multi-core Saber setups. They have batteries and specialized damage to extend their reach, even if their refund isn't nearly as robust as the Trung sisters or Dioscuri. While high-end farming may be a difficult task for the sisters, there is another enticing lead. Their Noble Phantasm grants party health regen for 3 turns, 1k every turn. This healing lets you run them in a Pseudo Immortal team where you have the option of riding out Merlin. The catch is that you still really want an overcharge enabler, which might compel you to run a suboptimal setup if you go with the usual Himiko or Morgan. That said, Rhaenys does have party overcharge on her Noble Phantasm, so running her might give you some legs to stand on. If you want to get weird with it, try this team on for size. I call it the literal clusterfuck. The Trung sisters have the fairly unusual group servant tag. Down the road we get Santa Nemo, who's like Da Vinci for poor friends. Well, one of his special skills is an attack buff that doubles up on group servants. He's also got a party evade to bail you out of trouble. To complete this bizarre package, you throw in another one of the group servants. Don Quixote is due fairly soon, and while I'd hesitate to call him a good servant, he does generate stars and donate charge to the rest of the team. And if you somehow get this living football to NP, more party buffs. A little attack, a little crit damage. Everyone wins. Except you. Because you took the Trung sisters, Santa Nemo, and Don Quixote into a 90++ node, and now you're stuck there for the next hour. If you prefer Rats the Dwarves though, Daikokuten is another group servant due for later this year. They pack party NP gain, evasion, charge per turn, stars, and healing per turn. Not a bad defensive package as far as clusterfuck teams go. The Trung sisters have a skill I haven't actually talked about yet. Its sisterly bond and its consistent effect is a personal arts and buster buff. It also comes with an on-hit component. Arts cards increase buster performance and vice versa for a single turn. Unfortunately, the buff swing 1 turn is a pain since, unlike other servants with similar mechanics, you don't run the Trung sisters in solo setups, so you may find this quite unreliable. The upside is that if you happen to get a buster card on your NP turn, you can just send it out first. For this reason, I'd also recommend attaching the Da Vinci command code to one of her busters. Also, a 4-turn cooldown gives this skill extremely high uptime, with only a single turn gap, so even if the benefits of incest are modest, you'll at least have consistent access to it. One of the funniest things about Sisterly Bond is that it receives an indirect nerf with the introduction of Mighty Chains, which disincentivizes BAB and ABA chains in favor of incorporating quick cards. Even though the effect magnitudes stay the same, the opportunity cost of committing to this skill actually goes up. Free crit chance of getting all 3 starter bonuses is pretty hard to pass up on. Now let's compare the Trung sisters to their most direct competition, the Dioscuri. Castor and Pollux are restricted by a 1-turn attack and NP damage buff, but have higher output for that single turn. Against stationary targets, they can ramp damage with a card type debuff, but in moving fights, the Trung sisters are going to fare better on that front. The Dioscuri generally have selfish buffs, but in exchange their Noble Phantasm packs 2 very powerful bits of utility, Defense Ignore and Invuln Pierce. So against bosses that tank up, you can expect them to perform more consistently. That is, of course, assuming you can end the battle before they run out of steam. In long fights, the Trung sisters can actually let your team tank some hits. They're dependent on Castoria for NP turns, but their healing and crit resistance give you more of a buffer against regular enemy attacks. If, say, you got a bunch of copies while hunting for Lambdarillis, you could kinda cram the sisters into a Dioscuri-shaped box with the help of craft essences. City of Dreams comes with Defense Ignore, while Women of Nita Nichiryu has Invuln Pierce. That second option won't be around until the Samurai Remnant event though. For general usage, Black Rail if you have it, Ocean Flyer if you don't. The truth though is that you don't really need the Trunk Sisters or the Dioscuri. As 5-star servants they have a high buy-in. The sisters at least have party buffs, but without specialized damage, their super high-end usefulness is limited. It's hard to escape the impression that Sabers pay a premium for a crumb of NP refund. For most purposes, the 4-star art Sabers are going to give you most of what you need from this class at a fraction of the price. Saito and Lancelot are there if you've pulled copies, and Hoka Saber will become universally available through the evocation system in mid-2025. Now let's take a look at the history behind the sisters, but before I get to that, a few things to keep in mind. First of all, I'm not a real historian, just a nerd. Secondly, I'm going to use the term Vietnam to describe where this story takes place. The area in question goes under a lot of different names, and it has a lot of components that don't fuse together into Vietnam until way later. But for the sake of following along, I'm just going to say Vietnam. With that said, this story takes us to the 1st century AD. For about 100 years, Vietnam had been under the control of the Chinese Han Dynasty, and a part of what helped them keep that going was that they ruled with a light hand. Aristocrats were encouraged to take up Chinese customs, but they generally didn't fuck with the commoners. But by the time of the sisters, the Han Dynasty had entered its second phase. A usurper had broken the dynastic chain, culminating in a devastating rebellion. At the end of this process, the new Emperor Guangwu had managed to glue the empire back together. But this had been a tremendously expensive process, so to get the country back on sound financial footing, he sent out his agents to raise income. Enter Su Ding. Su Ding was in charge of the Red River Delta, and unfortunately for the Vietnamese, he had some pretty creative ideas when it came to revenue. On top of old favorites like conscripting workers and applying a salt tax, he said, "Hey, you want to fish in your own rivers? Pay me." While he was at it, he cranked up sinicization policies. At the time, one of the main cultural frictions between the Chinese and Vietnamese was that the former abided by Confucian patriarchal norms, while the latter was either matriarchal or sex equal depending on who you ask. That difference might explain what happened next. One of the sisters, Trung Truc, was part of a gathering with her husband and a number of other aristocrats. Maybe they were talking business, and maybe they were talking rebellion. Either way, Su Ding found out about it through his network of spies and accused them of option B. He carted off the men, executed them, and strung up their bodies as a reminder of who's in charge. The expectation was that this would cow the women and any bystanders into submission. Except he wasn't in China proper. Doesn't work like that down here. Su Ding had fucked around, but before I get to the find out part of our story, I have a confession to make. I am 100% sure that I've been saying Trung wrong this whole time. I recorded this video in halves, the servant guide half and the history half. Well, during my prep for part 2, it occurred to me that I should probably look into this. Once I got through the SEO clusterfuck of useless AI pronunciation videos, I learned something. In Vietnamese, the phrase Trunk Sisters is something close to Hai Ba Chung. As far as my ears could tell, it almost sounded like a CH sound. But in the videos I listened to, they say it really fast, so it's hard for me to parse out the specific pronunciation, even at half speed. For the sake of keeping everything simple, I'm just gonna take the L and keep saying Trung. But keep in mind that's almost certainly not how it's pronounced. To anyone who speaks the language, by all means help me out. But yeah, no one was impressed with Su Ding's murder all the husbands trick, and this turned into a catalyst for rebellion. Trung Truc led the charge, joined by her sister Trung Ni. The Han administration had spent the last few years systematically pissing everyone off, so the sisters had no shortage of recruits. Rallying men and women alike, they exploded across the area, driving the Chinese back to more secure possessions. Trung Truc was crowned queen, and the Vietnamese got to enjoy their newfound freedom for around 2 years. But in the 3rd year, dread forces appeared on their borders. The Han Emperor Guangwu opted for a slow but decisive response. He tasked one of his best generals, Ma Yuan, to lead 20,000 Han regulars down south and bring things under control. This was a part of the same veteran force that had just reunited the empire, so the sisters were in for a rough fight. At this point, you roll some dice. Reading history, you'll see massive Chinese armies march down south, only to get decimated by disease on more than a few occasions. Seems like Han forces lost nearly half their number outside of combat, but Ma Yuan won the coin flip and managed to lead the surviving half to a series of crushing victories against the Vietnamese. The Trung sisters steadily lost ground in troops until they were cornered in their hometown. With defeat now certain, they vanished into the mists of history. Dead in combat, executed by the Han, threw themselves into a river, no one's quite sure. Though their effective rule was short, the sisters were among the first major pulls in the tug-of-war between the Chinese and the Vietnamese, with control changing hands as their respective power waxed and waned. And they'd go back and forth with few interruptions until the late 1800s, when, over the next century, you'd see a lot of other powers come and go. You know what happened when the Vietnam War ended? Vietnam and China were right back at it. I guess some things never change. In one respect, the sisters would get their revenge on Ma Yuan. Though he dodged the hand of pestilence down south, his luck ran out within 10 years, and he'd go down from an illness while campaigning in Hunan. You can only roll the dice so many times before tropical disease gets you. Thanks for watching. Like if you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more, and come on to twitch.tv/Finotaisen where I stream every week, 3 PM Pacific time. See you there.